Welcome to the webinar series on Grassland Dialogue, which is organized by the IUCN CEM, South Asia members, and hosted by the IUCN CEM. As you all are aware, that IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management, CEM in short, promotes ecosystem-based approaches for the management of landscapes and seascapes, provides guidance and support for ecosystem-based management, and promotes resilient socio-ecological systems to address global challenges. Under this large umbrella, the South Asian Regional Network of the IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management, CEM SA for short, is a regional platform of global significance comprising of experts, professionals, and emerging leaders for contributing and sharing knowledge that is helping for upgradation and development of existing knowledge related to the concerns, challenges, and prospects of ecosystem management and transboundary conservation efforts in this region. The region is fortunate to possess important topographic regions and ecosystems ranging from the mountain ranges of the Himalayas and Hindu Kush to the coastal marine and island ecosystems. And one such important ecosystem is the grassland ecosystem that has increasingly received attention for their ecological importance and also for the threats they face in the landscape. And be it the tropical Tarai grassland remnants of northern India and Nepal, to the subalpine boogyals of the Himalayas, to the Shola grassland climaxes of Western Ghats, they require dire attention as they face several climatic and anthropogenic threats. And today we have a galaxy of experts who are associated with grassland conservation to discuss and deliberate on the same. And to begin with, I would like to invite Dr. Madhav Karki, the Vice Chair and Asia Focal Point for the Steering Committee of the IUCN CEM for his keynote address. I have had the good fortune of working with Dr. Karki sir when he led the IPBS Asia Pacific Assessment as co-chair, and also as the MEP member way back in 2015-16. And this was one of the first regional assessments, which clearly, with his over 40 years of professional experience in natural resource management and sustainable development in the Hindu Kush Himalayan and Southeast Asian countries, that set the tone on how the assessment could be undertaken. Other than this, as the IPBS MEP member, he is leading different multilateral and bilaterally funded projects and programs on indigenous and local knowledge in climatic change adaptation, ecosystem-based adaptation, watershed management, adaptation at scale and environment assessment, and with over 100 publications on biodiversity conservation, including conservation of key species and so on. Sir has been an important role in different international platforms. He also finds time to serve as the Executive Director of the newly established Non-Profit Center for Green Economy Development, Nepal. So, sir, over to you for your opening remarks and setting the tone for this discussion.
So, good evening, everyone, and namaste. So, thank you, Dr. Sonali, for your very liberal, I would say, and very elaborate introduction of mine. Thank you, Dr. Salini, for giving me this platform. And thank you, everyone, and warm welcome to you all to this very important dialogue, which is often neglected. So I will just share my screen first. Yeah, so let me go. So once again, thank you. This is I'm supposed to give an opening remark, and this is kind of setting the scene. So first of all, I would like to say that the grassland ecosystems are often neglected because more valuable ecosystems such as forest and then the coastal and marines are in discussion So I would like to appreciate Dr. Salini for bringing this topic to the dialogue. First of all, I think it's very important to understand what grasslands are actually. If you see the literature, they discuss grassland biomes and grassland ecosystems. Biomes are actually, and grasslands are in Northern America and in Australia are more commonly described as rangelands. And the biomes are very large and they are extensive grasslands. And these they are generally in drier climate, and they are through their adaptation process, they have been able to adapt to longer term droughts, and the savanna grasslands are also adaptive to rainfalls, heavy rainfalls. In South Asia, you can see that we have mostly open grazing and woodland savannas in tropical and subtropical areas. But then in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, Himalayan region, we have more alpine grasslands, which are described much in detail as the steppes of the Tibetan plateau or the Hindu Kush Himalaya regions. So these ecosystems now are smaller in the area within the biomes, and this difference between grassland ecosystems and grassland biomes is that while biomes they are distinct, I would say the unit where we have plants, animals, and climate. In the ecosystem, it is more interaction between biotic and abiotic factors. So the interaction is more in ecosystem, and it is good under the CM umbrella. We discuss the ecosystem context because we are managing grassland based on the ecosystems principles and approaches. So the grassland ecosystem, as we did in the Asia Pacific, the regional assessments are one of the most, I would say, highly impacted ecosystems, both due to climatic forces, but also both by climatic forces and socioeconomic forces. Talking about the grassland in South Asia, you can see that most of them are actually rangelands, which are highland pastures, and we have alpine dry and wet alpine pastures, and therefore China had the largest share, followed by of course Afghanistan, then Pakistan, then India, and Nepal, Bhutan. They have a smaller area. So actually, when we talk of grasslands, then you can think of very large, open, I would say, ecosystems where few trees are found and shrubs are found. Mostly it is grasses. Of course, in Tibetan plateau, you will get shrubs, forbs, and then the grasses. So this sort of gives you a picture. Now, why grasslands are important? Grasslands in South Asia are important for local, national, regional economy, environment, and biocultural heritage. Globally, more than 120 million pastoralists rely on more than 5 billion hectares of rangeland. Of course, in South Asia, we don't have this large extent. But what we can say that this whatever range and pasture land, grasslands we have, they are under serious pressure due to overgrazing, degradation, and socio-political changes. So there are they are under threat, but we also have opportunities, and I think we should not neglect the opportunity parts. As you can see, the rangeland types, I was saying the open woodland type, then we have the temperate grasslands, we have alpine moisture scrub and meadows, we have alpine dry scrubs, we have desertic formation. So we have different type of grasses, and you can see that large part of it in the Tibetan plateau. Similarly, now if you see the trends, and this is from ISI mode, you can see that the grassland cover, most of them, of course, is increasing because of the protected area. So actually, protected area declaration has actually helped the grasslands of South Asia. But if you look at the key vertebrate species, the wildlife, which is another important component of the grassland because it's a good habitat for many animals, the trend is negative, so it is going down. So the grassland conversion is also increasing because a lot of grasslands are being converted. One, of course, the vegetation shifting because of the climate change. So grasslands are started getting different type of vegetation composition, more shrubs. So the grassland quality, which is defined by having palatable pastures, which is decreasing. So, but in the steppe grassland, that is still kind of that change is not very distinct. And you can see grazing degradation is increasing, climate change effect is increasing. So overall, you can see that the rangeland health is on the decline, and this is why we need conservation. And we need conservation because in the Himalayan region, as all of you know, grasslands are very rich in medicinal and aromatic plants, non-timber forest products. So they are also a source of livelihood. They produce a wide variety of ecosystem goods and services, not only livestock feed and forage for grazing and also for stall feeding, but also they have mineral resources, and they have a lot of, I would say, intangible services, including carbon sequestration, storage, regulation of water, and maintaining landscape beauty for ecotourism, nature-based tourism, and maintaining biodiversity. Actually, they are also in the Himalayan grassland ecosystems. They contribute to the water towers of South Asia because they conserve water. So the value which has been calculated for the Himalayan grassland by ISI mode is of biological, hydrological, atmospheric, environmental, and miscellaneous. And I don't want to read all that because you all are familiar, but you can see increasingly when we are discussing about carbon sequestration and adaptation and mitigation, the role of grasslands are increasing because the grasslands not only, of course, they also have peatlands in the Tibetan plateau, and so they can store a lot of carbon. So you can see that the rangeland ecosystem, while the ecological and natural ecosystem processes provide kind of a natural capital, then we have the social and economic processes. They provide the life value resources. So they have multiple values, and I will. So the climate change is actually putting a lot of pressure, giving a lot of stress to grasslands, because grasslands always have to, survive within a limited water, which means there are always water. There's always water shortage, and they are water stressed. So with the climate change, the temperature increases, evapotranspiration increases, and land use changes are happening, and the rainfall is not actually is not actually predicted to be significantly going to be higher. So they are, I would say, under tremendous pressure, and there is a huge threat to grassland ecosystem from not only climate change, but also from socioeconomic changes. And that means the habitats for the wild animals, the feed and fodder for the animals, and of course livelihood for the people are under threat. So what we should do, I would urge all of you working in the natural science, social science, and other political, economic areas and research areas, that we need to raise the profile of grassland ecosystems and their services to the human population and to the wildlife population, also for the One Health goal of the country. We need to develop sustainable grassland management strategies, which means it has to be adaptive. As you have in India, joint forest management. There are a lot of community-based management in Nepal, and in Tibet they have co-management, where government and then the community they share the management responsibility. So we have different models, and this needs to be promoted in the context of climate change. We need to assess ecosystem, grassland ecosystem, and if this provides a good framework, perhaps we can champion this aspect. We need to develop different models of how we can manage equitably, and payment for ecosystem services is one model where the water services and then the climate services and tourism services grassland produce, not to speak of maps and NTFPs, they can be very good basis to develop the best mechanism. We need to also bundle these ecosystem services so that PACE scheme is not only provide economic benefits, but also the other benefits such as the climate benefits. And we need to advocate policy improvements. Many countries don't have rangeland grassland policies. While I was in EC mode, I was successful in developing policy for Nepal, and Pakistan was under process, but for other countries we don't have. It is under some sort of umbrella forest policy. We need to have multi-stakeholder consultation, multi-stakeholder approach, where all the stakeholders, they decide what is sustainable management, and then we need to strengthen capacities, knowledge, and implementation. So knowledge-based, I would say, capacity building, knowledge sharing among the countries. I think we can share, and then we can scale up and scale out successful pilots of pest and sustainable management or grazing management models. And we need to also mobilize investment because I think NTFP provide good ground for investment, especially in the tourism and then the map sector. So with that, I would like to thank you all for, sorry, taking a little bit more time. And I want to wish you a very successful dialogue. I know we have a very eminent speakers, very learned speakers. So I'm looking forward to listening to you. I may be off and on, but I will be listening as much as I can. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for setting the tone and giving us an overview of how especially the way forward should be on this much discussed topic, but at the same time in terms of assessments and the aspect of payment for ecosystem services and how we can try to evaluate in terms of the millions of people that the grassland ecosystems are able to support. So thank you so much, sir. I'm afraid we are a little short on time, and because we might want to run into a bit of a question and answers, I'll request all the speakers to slightly curtail their presentation, make it around 7 to 8 minutes so that we have a cushion to ask you a few more questions. I'll request all the audience listening in, tuning in, to either send in their questions in the chat box or send us a direct message so that we can take it up with the relevant speakers. But with this, I come to the second speaker for the session today, who is Dr. Vibhuti Lerkar. Now, Dr. Vibhuti Prasad Laukar is the program secretary of Aranya, and he is a scientist turned conservationist with over 2.5 decades of field experience in regions of high biodiversity and armed conflict. He has received the IUCN Heritage Hero Award in 2016 for his outstanding contribution towards conservation of Manas World Heritage Site from the IUCN World Heritage Program and World Commission on Protected Areas. He is leading the Elephant Research and Conservation Division and the Livelihood Division of Aranya, a reputed NGO working in Northeast India. And with over 40 research and conservation projects funded by various national and international donors, he has also published more than 50 scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals. Dr. Laukar is a member of the IUCN Species Survival Commission, of the Asian Elephant Specialist Group, Invasive Species Group, Busted Specialist Group, and the Commission for Ecosystem Management, and the WCPA. He's also a dear friend and colleague, and we look forward to working together to understand the challenges, especially of the Tarai grassland habitat and obligate species for the protected areas in Northeast India. So over to you, Dr. Vibhuti.
Thank you, Dr. Shunali Madam, and thank you for introducing me. I think my job is already done by Karki sir. Already majority of things is covered by sir. Still, I'll go quickly as majority of our viewers are general public. Sir already mentioned, but still I'll do. Grassland is dominated by grass species, as you know, with little or no tree cover, and different institution has different definition. Like Ecological Society of America, it's a grassland with community dominated by grass species. So I'll skip that. So if we see the characteristics of grasses, a grassland from in a region where climatic and edaphic factor prevent the growth of trees, particularly all the grassland is evolved under the grazing or drought or periodic fire, and almost all the existing grassland are maintained by this factor. And majority of affecting grassland distribution is soil, water table, geographical location. Almost 40% geographical location and management. Almost 40% of the world area except Antarctica has grassland. Nasal grassland, tropical temperate, which is in growing condition only for a short period, particularly as it is and during that short period they grow very fast. And tropical trees, particularly in tropical grassland, largely maintained by annual or biannual burning mostly in pairs, whereas unprotected areas it is mostly maintained by livestock grazing and other biotic factors. So if we already sir has mentioned that, but still, I'll also add to that, grasses are the wild ancestor of our present day cereal, and they are the very important reservoir for crop gene pool, and it control carbon and help global warming, contribute to climate stability. Very important is survival of grassland obligate species is closely linked with existence of grassland habitat. We have best example is GIB, Great Indian Bustard, Pygmy Hog, then Bengal Florican, hog deer. Wide range of wild species are found in grassland, and their survival is very closely linked with the existence of grassland. Once they are gone, and then they will be gone forever. So generate and preserve soil, renew the soil fertility, protect watershed, and also soil it prevents soil erosion, and it also, as sir mentioned, meal livelihood for millions of people, forage and along with the forage of livestock and recreation and tourism. In country like India, this holds a very important place in economy of the country, as it the source of food and fodders to domestic as well as the present day, or whatever we are eating, crops, cereals, or our grass plant only. So if you see goods and services, already sir have mentioned, but still it gives lots of support services and our human needs to that. And these are some of the very obligate species which are only lives in grassland, and without grassland they cannot survive. these are, and also traditionally we have been in almost all the Asian countries traditionally using thatch and bamboos and this thing for houses. And also culturally, most of the majority of grasses are also Vedic grass. So in lots of our pujas, ritual grasses used extensively. And in if you see in grassland in South Asia, we have majority of that in Tarai, Duar, Savanna grassland in both India and Nepal, Bhutan, and then Banni grassland in BD in South Western Ghat, and then Solar grassland in western areas, and grasslands of Sri Lanka. So these areas, these are the majority of grassland we have in South Asia. And then if you see the in Indian subcontinent, some measure already extended, it is within map, mostly in different areas of different parts of India. However, still some of the region has left in the map, which I thought it's a mountain grassland, in particularly in Himachal Pradesh, Sikkim, Jammu and Kashmir, Nagaland, Manipur. So including, and then including our Meghalaya. So, and all these things are support to agrarian, pastoralism, all these things support extensively. So, and another very important is wet grassland, which is a best example is Kaibul Lamsau National Park in Manipur, which is called Phomdi. This is also another grassland in we have. Then in Nepal, particularly lowland of Nepal, both in protected areas and non-protected areas like Chitwan, Bardia, Suklafanta, Koshitapu, Banke National Park, all these areas are support along with the riverine tributaries, that islands, these extensively in Nepal, there's grassland. We have in Sri Lanka, mostly grassland is divided into three parts: mountain, savannas, and low grasslands. So despite still in India we have the among these three countries, India has largest. Major threats is conversion of agricultural lands and human habitation, because these are fertile. Grassland was one of the most fertile land, and it easily converted into agricultural land. Plantation in grassland in many part till recently, it has many including some department, including in the government, do plantation. Then unsystematic burning, livestock grazing, collection of thatch, alien invasive species, that invasion is very critical. And then also succession of trees, invasion of trees, and linear infrastructure development project. These are some of the key threats in grassland. And then what challenges, particularly if we see in Indian condition, the management plan of India is driven by working plan, and since 1870s. Then in that the first forest policy in 1894, second forest policy in 1950 to ignore the ecological importance of grassland, and then Wildlife Protection Act 1972, it realized about the vegetation has a conservation value both at the biotic community and national, but still grassland didn't receive attention. Grassland is identified as a critical habitat in National Forest Commission in 2003. It recommended for protection of livestock, protection of grassland, and protect for wildlife and livestock. However, it also same thing happened with the grassland, never received attention. And again a special task force came into in 2006. They also submitted a report to Planning Commission. However, still no action or policy developed. Has lead all these things grassland into unproductive and unprotected or a wasteland. Few grassland under some protected area like national park getting attention. However, very few. However, majority of grassland in outside protected area is rapidly declining. So way forward is sensitize the policy stakeholder, particularly policymaker, about the importance of the grassland. Advocacy jointly, like-minded organization, individual, to develop is a key policy, particularly on the grazing policy, on land use policy. And it's become no department no department, some say veterinary department, they do attention for forest development. Forest department is taking care of more on the trees. Again, agriculture department on the agriculture. So no one needs to become no one's business. So that is very crucial point where all of us we need to come forward and jointly develop pressurized policymaker to develop some policy, as Karki sir already said they have policy for Nepal, but other countries very few. Then we need to also conduct research on many things. For example, impact of livestock grazing on the soil, inventories on grassland, pollinator its role, economic uses grassland. Although few studies has been carried out in part some areas, but majority are still in left. Then to explore the possibility new angle involving communities, particularly on management of grassland, and explore the best uses on the sustainable livelihood, like preparation of mat, container, so that, and also we also need to do like plantation of grass species, as we do plantation of in trees. So that also need to initiate, so that grassland we can survive grassland, and grassland can be value can be and appreciated at global level. With that, thank you for attention. So I'll stop here. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Vibhuti there. And time permitting, we might want to also discuss the kind of management interventions that you have kind of suggested based on your experiments in manus landscape and looking at invasives. But let's do that for another day. And we are indeed a little short on time, so I would request all the speakers to kindly curtail on their talks, so that we can have some more time for discussions. And I will also like to now request Dr. Vibhuti to co-host with me, because he did a lot of work in getting everything together for this. So, but of course, I'll introduce the next speaker, which is Dr. Indra Bhatt. He is currently working as a scientist and heading the Center for Biodiversity Conservation and Management at the G.V. Pant National Institute of Himalayan Environment at Almora. Dr. Bhatt has over 20 years of experience in different aspects of biodiversity conservation and its utilization, particularly for the Indian Himalayan region. And he has worked as a lead author for 2 chapters, cross chapters for mountains and food fibers and other ecosystem products in the IPCC report. And he would be talking to us regarding the high altitude grassland status and issues for the country. So over to you, Dr. Bhatt. Thank you.
So thank you so much, and very good evening to all of you. So am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes,
you are. You can put on the presentation full screen, because we can see, the slides.
So I have already put. Okay. So thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Sonali and Dr. Salni, for giving me this opportunity for this important event on the grassland issues and challenges. So I have been asked to present on the high altitude grassland status and issues. So my presentation, the outline of my presentation is basically what are the grasslands in Indian Himalayan regions, and I will focus more on the Indian Himalayan regions. Why grasslands are important, what are the issues and the impact on high altitude grassland, and what will be the strategy for the management. So this will be the outline of my presentation. And if you look at the grassland, Dr. Madhav Karki and Dr. Vibhuti has already said, the areas where the vegetation is dominated by grasses. Grasses are mostly the Poaceae family. They grow naturally on all continents except Antarctica. And this is one of the largest biome in the earth and cover 31 to 43% of the earth land area. So this is basically the grassland. These are the characteristics of the grassland. If you see the Indian Himalayan regions, in around 12.4 million hectares of grasslands, they include shrublands and savanna. They are found in the India. and they cover around 18% of the total land area. And if you look in the Indian Himalayan regions, there are around 35% of the land is covered by the grassland vegetation. And if you see in the different HR states, Indian Himalayan states, Jammu, Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, and Northeast region, and this is basically the how the grasslands are basically permanent pasture grassland, alpine pasture, temperate. These are the figures where grassland occurs. And if you see, next please. So the slide is not moving. I don't know. Oh. These are some type of the grassland. So grassland in the Indian Himalayan region, there are around 18% of the nation's total land is a grassland in the India. And if you look at the Indian Himalayan region, there are a 35% of the area under the grassland. If you see the state in the different Himalayan states, Jammu, Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Northeastern state, this is the basically the statics of the area cover under the grassland. If you see the types of grassland, there are many types of the warm temperate grassland, cool temperate grassy slopes, subalpine meadow, alpine meadow, and steppe formation in the different region, and they are basically in different altitudinal regions. If you look at the lower altitude, 1500 to 2500 meters, so this type of grassland, warm temperate, and similarly for the other regions like a cool temperate, subalpine, alpine, and steppe formation. Steppe formation is mainly in the trans Himalayan region like a cold desert. And if you see why basically the grassland, why they are important, as Madhav Karki sir and Vibhuti also said that they are the providers of the provisioning, regulating, supporting, and cultural services to mountain communities. Grassland are stockpiles of unique, threatened, and endemic biodiversity, valuable medicinal plants, and they act as a water catchment, biodiversity reserves, and potentially a carbon sinks to alleviate greenhouse gas emission. So these are some of the important characteristics of the grassland. If you see, I will give one example of the high altitude, that Yasa Gumba, that found in the high altitude grassland, and that grow in the alpine region of Uttarakhand, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh, and it is one of the important medicinal fungus used in the various diseases like asthma, pulmonary disease, cardiovasculars, and most importantly, it is a vitality strengthening. And every year, around 1.7 to 2 tons per year that collected from the IHR regions. And if you see only the income in the Pithoragarh district of Uttarakhand, around 18 to 19 million rupees per year they sell the Yasa Gumba. And if you see the single unit of the caterpillar, that is around US dollar 50 per that unit in China. And another example, they are the basically the source for the different livestock Himalayan regions, and around 12 million sheep, 10 million cattle, 3.4 million buffalo, and they all are dependent on the Himalayan, basically the high altitude grassland. If you see the medicinal plants, another source of those the Himalayan community, so Himalayan grassland basically they harbor numerous medicinal plants and harvested by the local people for their own use and sale. And if you see the statistics, the export of around 330 0.18 million worth of house per year, and most of them are from the high altitude grasslands. And further, if you see the what are the issues in the high altitude grassland, so there are many issues like soil erosion due to topographical fragility, weed colonization, overgrazing, uncontrolled tourism, uncontrolled utilization of natural resources, and human wildlife conflict. If you see the impact of those issues, so there is mainly the biodiversity loss is there, gully erosion, biodiversity loss, colonization of those invasive species, habitat shifting of wild ungulates, decreased daily maximum photosynthetic rate, and there are so many impact of those threats in the biodiversity. And if you see the solutions, and one issue that is overgrazing is one issue that reduce water holding capacity, and compaction reduce the permeability of the soil on the steeper slope, and this basically that decrease the grassage and increase the unpalatable species like a rhododendron, barberries species, euphorbia, and serb species. Basically they that increase. And solution we prepare, that we can prepare the guidelines for optimal use of grazing resources. And there are another that issue, that over extraction of medicinal plants, and this also create a problem for decreasing the availability of the medicinal plants. And solution, we need to educate the local people for sustainable collection and less disturbance to the habitats. And if you see
Dr.
the
Bhatt, sorry to interfere. We're a little short on time. You may want to kind
okay,
of, yeah.
but just 2 slides more. Thank you. And this is another issue and solution. And if you see what should be the management strategy for those degraded threads, and these are some of the management. And recently we have conducted one that experiment in the Dayara Bugyal in the high altitude regions, where we have used some check dams and that gully erosion through the bamboo stumps and the coir net. And if you see the photograph, the A, this is was the original sites, and D, if you see after the experiment, this was the biodiversity. And that's all. Thank you so much. And sorry, this was not working well today.
No, absolutely fine. I think it is all good. And thank you so much for your presentation. It's just that since we have a number of other speakers, we might want to, slightly fast track this. So now
No.
I request the next speaker. Thank you so much. You may want to start your slides while I introduce you. So we have our next speaker is Dr. Pankaj Joshi. He is a plant taxonomist who has studied and conservation ecologist by training with over 20 years in the arid and semi-arid landscapes of Gujarat state. His major contributions with the Gujarat has been with the Gujarat Institute of Desert Ecology, the Sahajivan NGO, and Ramble Research Station on leading the participatory research agendas, including conservation of key species with the biodiversity management committees, restoration and development of native ecosystems like grasslands and thorn forests, publications of various IUCN material, and new training on biodiversity conservation. Dr. Pankaj Joshi, I believe you're going to be speaking on the participatory conservation and restoration of Banni grasslands and biodiversity. So over to you.
First of all, I am thankful to organizer for this discussion and provide me to share our experience on participatory conservation and restoration approaches in Kutch. This is arid land of Gujarat state. Myself, on behalf of my associated organization like Sahajivan organization and Ramble Consortium, going to present on our approach on restoration and conservation of native tropical grassland and biodiversity. This is with help of local community, and through this we are try to contribute to increase the carbon sequestration and helping on balancing the climate change impact, not only on ecosystem and biodiversity of Banni region, but also on marginalized community who actually doing the traditional livestock rearing activity in Banni, locally called Maldaris, pastoralist community. This is the flow of my presentation, and as I said, basically I am going to share our participatory approaches with this room, and this is starting from participatory nature resource mapping exercise with pastoralists to understand their seasonal dependency on grassland. With simultaneously also we are collecting the scientific data on flora and fauna available in and around their grazing resources, or say that grazing routes or their corridors, their pastoralist corridor. And then we'll try to develop the action plan or conservation plan for habitat restoration, but without disturbing any threat or existing ecological food web or macro or micro habitat for several key species, because they are existing in grassland, like ground nesting bird, we have a lot of granivorous bird, we have reptiles and small mammals, etc. So in addition, we also started the implementation of action plan or conservation plan developed by various PRI, like we have CFMMC there, Community Forest Management Committees, in Banni. Total 47 CFMCs are working in Banni for restoration and conservation of this traditional grassland as well as the biodiversity. And this is actually we started before 3 years, and now this year almost we completed 4,000 hectare of native grassland from Prosopis juliflora invaded landscape. So this is actually Banni, Kutch region. This is the largest district in country and very close to Indo-Pakistan border, westernmost end of our country as well as the Gujarat state. And this is the drawing map of our Kutch district. Kutch district actually recorded is very diverse ecosystem and unique biodiversity. If you see, like including tropical grassland, we have thorn forest, mangrove, run we have, like saline marshy land we have. Kutch nahi dekha to kuch nahi dekha, jaise very famous for white desert. We have seasonal wetland also in Kutch, and all the ecosystem are also associating with some landscape based or nature resources based livelihood. Like we have grassland associated with a lot of pastoralist community. We have mangrove with fishermen, tropical thorn forest. Again, we have a lot of pastoralists and non-timber forest producer collector. And we have also a total 5 protected area in our Kutch. Great Indian Bustard Sanctuary we have in westernmost end of our Kutch district. We have 3 GIV in one grassland, Abrasa grassland, Great Indian Bustard, Florican and Hobara Bustard. We have Narayan Saror Wildlife Sanctuary, nice tropical thorn forest. These are the remaining last tropical thorn forest in our country. We have Kutch.
Excuse me, Joshiji, if you can go to your main presentation. We have limited time. Sorry for that.
This is for just background, sir. Yes, okay, no problem. So Banni is still we have a open grazing system. This is actually Banni area, 2,500 square kilometer area. This is a basic feature, 330 millimeter average rainfall. We have 13 days, hardly 13 days rainy days, and coefficient of variation. If you see 65% is coefficient of variation. High wind velocity during summer, high humidity in winter. So this is actually, this photo is actually show the history of Banni. Very scattered native trees and native shrub species like Acacia nilotica. We have Prosopis cinerea, Salvadora, and few more bushes. But now if you see, this is look like almost woodland and invasive by Prosopis juliflora. This is a basic feature of our Banni area, 2,500 square kilometer area. Very dynamic ecosystem, and the grass composition is actually depending on rainfall pattern and the intensity between 2 continuous rainfall. And we have maximum contour recorded in Banni is 11 or 12 mean sea level. We have 23 different kind of community. We have livestock population. If you see 80,000 livestock population in Banni grassland, we have 1 lakh liter per day milk produced, and almost 125 crore economy of milk related and livestock related economy. We have good biodiversity even in Banni, almost 200 plant species, including 50 grass species recorded in Banni. If you see bird diversity, 130 birds. We have reptiles and we have mammals of good population. We have free grazing system. As I already said, a lot of cow, buffalo, and migratory sheep and goats are depending on this particular grassland. We have good biodiversity. I'm not go more for this biodiversity, but very good biodiversity and a lot of key species and flagship species recorded in Banni area. We have good culture associated with Banni grassland, almost 20 plus community like Halepotra, Raisipotra, Mutwa. These are the local tribe of pastoralist community in Banni. We have social history of Banni. Like earlier, Banni people, they keep more cow, but after introduction of Prosopis juliflora, they are converting now in buffalo. And 500 years ago, the pastoralists came from Baluchistan and they settled here now. We have earlier they keep. They have a lot of traditional season grazing system and no physical boundary between 2 villages or panchayat, but still there are a lot of traditional name of each grazing patches. And they're depending on existing like biodiversity, vegetation composition, and geography and salinity. So each and every village panchayat, they have 40-45 polygon as a traditional grazing name. They have breeder association. 125 crore dairy business. We have annual Pasu Mela, 20 crore annually income from that. Now, up to this slide, I am basically set the background of presentation, because otherwise very difficult to understand my approach or our approach to for restoration and conservation of biodiversity and ecosystem. Now, since all the village panchayats started to develop their action plan under this FRA Act and FRA process, our role start to support them on same. And I also would like to say, like, all the process completed with one panchayat, like 47 CFMC constituted their committee and they start development their action plan. So I am going to present one case study as a case study with this show, our approach. So this is the third panchayat. We initiate resource mapping exercise, like we call also manual GIS system. And with help of elder pastoralists, we try to develop a map of seasonal grazing area, their routes, distribution of waterscape, and biodiversity, density of prosopis, juliflora, etc. So several layers we try to develop with elder pastoralists in the panchayat. So we did this exercise with 30 plus village panchayat. This is only one case study I am going to share here. And same convert to this particular manual GIS map, we convert it into proper GIS map, and there are several like different kind of habitat in the panchayat. This actually seasonal their dependency and vegetation. This actually tabulated seasonal dependency in major dominant habitat with like composition of vegetation like dense prosopis with mixed grassland, wetland, sweda, and prosopis. Like several other habitat are also dominant in the panchayat. So if we see, prosopis mixed grassland recorded with highest dependency by pastoralists in particular landscape, and this is throughout the year. This particular patch, if you see, this is a local name of grasses. So more dependency on this particular habitat throughout the year. And this is actually developed by their information, the traditional information and their perception. And they have very nice like metrics, the distribution of grazing patch, like they have metrics like classification of grassland patches as a good, medium, and saline. And same also, we are trying to tabulate it for better interpretation and support to this particular community on decision making, discussion on conservation and restoration of native grassland and biodiversity. Mainly three criteria. If you see the table, mainly three criteria they are using for classification of this particular landscape. They are mainly depending like palatability of particular patches, is annual, ephemeral grasses, nutritive and saline tolerant grassland. So the composition is actually determine the palatability of particular patch of grassland. The distance of grazing patches from villages and water point are also major characteristic to classification under like good, medium, and saline grassland. So out of 40 this different kind of patches in Dadar, they classify 24 patches as a good grassland based on their particular this traditional metrics of classification. So these are I just want to show this six particular the local name Tango, Sim, Layuaro, Bond. This is the traditional name of particular grassland, and these three maps shows the high nutritive, saline mix, and other mixed grassland, which actually required by their buffaloes and their other livestock. So they classified this particular six landscape as a priority area for their restoration for grazing ground. This another six particular grassland they classified for biodiversity significance area and for conservation of several bird species, mammals, and reptile species. So these are the local name. And each and every local name, like Kunjiwaro Church, Kunj means lot of crane, migratory train. They used to come particular this low line wetland area. Hanjwaro Tarao means lot of flamingos. They used to come for particular this pond. So each and every local name, if you see, these are associated with biodiversity or any dominant composition of grassland. So now the RAMBLE in coming into picture, the RAMBLE is actually research and monitoring in Bunny landscape. This is a consortium of several organizations, including Bunny Breeder Association, Sahajivan NGO, ETRI, NCBS, SISTI. We have local institutions like K-Link, Hundersala, and Kutch University. They are also partner of this consortium. And this is an open research platform actually. And the chief mandatory, if you see, the facilitating disciplinary and interdisciplinary research on various aspects, including Bunny grassland ecosystem, the pastoral community, and their interaction between with grassland. So over the last 8 or 9 years, Remble completed 10 plus master dissertation and 1 PhD thesis in Bunny.
Pankaj, you have 2 minutes. We are sorry. We are
Yes,
late.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm going for. So Remble researcher actually helped to collect baseline data before and after implementation of particular development of an action plan for each village panchayat or their CFMC. So they are mainly to clear the Prosopis Julia from a particular identified restored area. And this actually supported by Axis Bank Foundation to Sir Jeevan. Sir Jeevan and Remble staff is also involving monitoring a range of like vegetation parameter, biomass we are collecting, diversity of species, richness. Also we are collecting from each restored area. So the monitoring of particular site, and these are the major composition of grass species, top 10. Similar way, we are also collecting a lot of biodiversity data, and this is again help from Axis Bank Foundation. And every year we are declaring 3 to 5 fellowship, and they are actually doing a lot of baseline research for this particular village panchayat. And we have a lot of baseline now distribution of various important biodiversity for entire Bunny as well as particular this in and around the restoration site. So this is the basic understanding of Bunny biodiversity distribution in its and every habitat. So based on now participatory resource mapping exercise and Remble researcher database, we are trying to develop some kind of local map for conservation of rare endangered biodiversity as well as the restoration of their native grassland. So after that, each panchayat compile the information and they decide to start the restoration work in around the targeted landscape, including like Prosopis invaded grassland and waterscape. So this is actually landscape level understanding, and after understanding, they are started their restoration work in targeted landscape. So based on approval plan by committee at Bunny Breeder Association and Remble Research Station, East Panchayat, they started their action plan with uprooting the Prosopis from like using of machinery and local labors. So in addition, we also like collected many native seed for restoring the native trees, shrub and grass species composition, and as suggested and directed by like Remble research outcome on respective side. So each and every action plan is developed by Remble researcher as well as the using of traditional information available with particular pastoralist community. So this is the after restoration of particular restoration site, how it looked like.
Pankaj, I'm so sorry because we are
Sir,
running.
this is last slide. Sir, this is the last slide. After regeneration, this is the monitoring of species composition, and we have very positive, like increasing species diversity, composition, and overall health of the ecosystem. Thank you, sir. This is the last slide. So there is one popular Jat Maldari warning in local language, Kutchi language. दूध में नु माखन कढनु नहीं, गगे के वेकनु नहीं, ने पके के छडनु नहीं. जड़े इत हिंदो कयामत आंजे नजदीक है. So it meaning कि
thank you Pankaj ji. I have to stop here. Sorry because we are already running almost 30 minutes late. Yes.
Okay, sir. Here I stop.
Please stop the presentation here. Thank you. So we will now next speaker is Dr. Harini. Harini is a assistant professor in the School of Advanced Science and Engineering at National Institute of Advanced Studies, NIAS, Bangalore. She is investigating multiple aspects of coastal lagoon and lake, including biogeochemistry, hydroecology, land, water, human nexus, access from the ecosystem perspective. She has been a long-term researcher with Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. She's a PI of DST funded women scientist, and she's particularly interested in multiple disciplinary approach. So over to Harini, you can start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everybody. It's been a pleasure to listen to the earlier speakers. Thanks for the introduction. And without further ado, I go on to my presentation. So the topic I had chosen today is to speak about sea grasses. Sea grasses are the blue grasses. So I termed them as blue grasses for green future, pivotal roles of sea grasses in building land-human sea nexus. So if we see the kind of discussions that we always have about sea grasses, they are very limited actually in nature, because it's not just there is no awareness about it, but the number of studies that take up sea grasses are quite less. But of late, a lot of attention has been given to sea grasses. First, because the global distribution of sea grasses is very, very low. Okay, there are only about 60 species which are known, but their ranges are very pretty high. And they're distributed over 6 global bioregions, as I've shown here. I'd like to bring your attention to the photographs here. Some of them belong to the temperate bioregion and some to the tropical. The one in the bottom, if you see, for example, Halophila ovalis and Halophila spinulosa, they belong to the tropical bioregions, whereas the others, they belong to the temperate bioregions. And they are very adequately named, appropriately. For example, if you see the Zostera marina, it's called common eel grass. Okay, so it's specific to the habitat where for the fishes such as eels. So it's called eel grass. Where the turtles belong to, they are known as turtle grass, where there are, in intertidal regions where the shallow water environment, it's called paddle grass. Especially in Tamil, it is known as Sethu Pasi. So there are lots of links with local communities and how these sea grasses itself are named and they are viewed. In India, there are about 6 genera and 13 species, mostly distributed in Gulf of Mannar and Park Bay, and especially in the Andaman Nicobar Islands and the Lakshadweep Islands. So the significance is pretty huge. If you see in terms of the carbon storage, they contribute up to 15% of carbon storage in the ocean, and long-term burial rates, which are very, very high. And the importance of sea grasses is that they sequester a large amount of carbon per year. You can see here it says about 0.012 to 1.33 metric tons of carbon per hectare per year. So these are very, very important environments, and their estimated ecosystem values is also very high. The most important thing that they contribute to is as habitats for fish stocks. So they are very intricately linked to the socioeconomics of the region. I'll talk about this further. One thing that we have to understand is that sea grasses contribute in several ways while they're alive or dead. So when they're alive, they contribute, as I mentioned, to the global marine carbon cycles by contributing, a lot of methane to the atmosphere. But they also sequester a lot of carbon dioxide, and they contribute to what is known as blue carbon. So they are very, very important blue carbon sinks actually in the marine environment. And they're also the nursery grounds for juveniles of different species, especially fishes, prawns. So you can see different varieties of species which inhabit seagrass meadows for their quiet and their microtidal environment. And their landed values increase by 6%, for example, if the seagrass ecosystems are present and when they are not present. But it has been seen through research, especially in recent times, that if the seagrass meadows are lost, what are the impacts on the environment? The first and the most important impact is they cause what are known as regime shifts, and they cause loss of the regenerative capacities of the sediment to contribute nutrients to the water column. So this is a very, very big impact on the ecosystem as such. They also release a large amount of methane. okay, when they're alive and dead. I'll talk more about this methane cycling aspect and the roles of seagrasses in a while, but they contribute a lot of methane in local scales, which can cause, you know, a big impact on climate change, even greater than that of carbon dioxide. And the massive loss of the economically significant species which depend on seagrasses for their habitats, that is a massive effect it has when the seagrasses die off. And it's associated with not just the environmental aspect part of it, it is also affects the economic as well as the social livelihoods. So here I've seen mentioned what are the threats that the seagrasses face. Some of these are known to us. For example, the anthropogenic impacts from motorized fishing boats, deployment of nets, overfishing, and then effect of, you know, runoffs into the coastal ecosystems, which cause algal blooms and lower the dissolved oxygen, dredging. These are all aspects that we are aware of, which can cause direct threats to seagrasses. But what I want to highlight through this medium today is that there are some other issues which are not very well exposed. For example, there is a disease which is reported in recent literature. It's called the seagrass wasting disease, caused by a protist that has not been, you know, is not very evidently expressed, and it is not very well known for studies from the Indian region. And also to explore whether there are negative feedbacks of the seagrass meadows when they are dead, as I told you, into the carbon cycling and release of methane. That is still not known. So moving on, I'm showing in this slide the importance of how seagrasses mediate the release of methane. So if we see a typical terrestrial methane release cycle, it's very straightforward. The peat from the burial of the terrestrial plants, they are buried under the ground, and the decomposition of the organic matter leads to the release of methane, and these cycles take over several years. If we see the very simple pathway in which seagrasses mediate this kind of release, is that there is sediment organic compounds which are present in the sediment. So when the seagrasses die and they get buried, after decomposition, there are several other processes which lead to the release of methane. And there is also additional release from the sediment itself in the absence of seagrasses, where more methane is contributed to the atmosphere. But what we don't know act as straws for methane, it seems, from the sediment. So what happens is that when they are present, the sediments don't release methane directly into the water in dissolved form, and then later they are released into the atmosphere. That does not happen. So there is a typical feedback control that seagrasses have on the release of methane. There is also the coping parameter to salinity, where the seagrass systems are very, very important roles. So here their sensitivity to salinity changes, that helps the seagrasses to mediate the amount of release of methane into the water and the atmosphere. So they result in two types of feedback controls, one on the salinity changes itself, and another on the feedback controls on the microbial populations which mediate the release of these methylated compounds. Those are the methanogenic archaea. So they help in slow and sustained releases, and hence on basically the intake of methane also. Okay, so there are multiple ways in which so beautifully the seagrasses ecosystems control how methane is released to the atmosphere. So from the resilience perspective, if we see, there are three important ways in which they contribute to the overall resilience of coastal systems. Number one is the resilience to salinity changes in the coastal environment, where they help to bring or maintain the brackish water characteristics. Second way is how they control the stoichiometric releases of nutrients with respect to the overall methane stocks. And they do this in coordination with the mangroves as well as the estuarine environments, which is a very, very natural and a very unique way to manage the carbon cycle by itself. So loss of seagrasses.
Dr. Harini, 2 minutes.
Yes,
you need to finish quickly.
Yes. So I was talking about how they coordinate this along with the mangrove and estuarine environments. They also help to preserve the massive methane contributions through sustained releases. So we have to actually see how fragmentation of seagrasses occur in modern times, which is not very well understood. And this is a part of a work in progress in our in my lab, in my team, where we try to see how seagrasses can act as medium for ecosystem-based restorative approaches. So if we see India's policies, there's one policy, the National Policy on Marine Fisheries, which recognize the importance of seagrasses. Other than that, there are no exclusive policies to provide long-term management frameworks or monitoring frameworks. So we have to, when we are looking at the contributions of seagrasses, coupling them with the social and the transformational spaces, it is very important for us to understand the habitat in terms of the vulnerability, the nursery in terms of the natural capitals, the nutrient cycling, the landed values in the presence of seagrasses, how new technologies can help us to monitor the ecosystem services, also to look at socio-ecological models, strengthened through the nature-based solutions approaches, including socio-technical advancements. So one very important thing which is very clear is to have adequate policy frameworks. We need scientific investigations on eco-restorative advancements for seagrass-based systems. We also need to promote indigenous and traditional knowledge systems and participatory models for eco-restoration. We can use technologies like remote sensing to monitor the changes in the seagrass patches, and we can include also effective fishery advisories through very, very robust technological frameworks to see how the disturbances to the seagrass systems can be removed. So in conclusion, I would say that seagrass conservation is very much linked to blue carbon sequestration, and that is linked to how we can manage climate-induced risks and reduce them. So this has a direct bearing on the land-based approaches such as land degradation neutrality approaches, and which will lead to our societies and communities' high climate resilience and better standard of living for all. So thank you for the opportunity, and I await some questions from you for further interaction. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Harni. It was a very nice presentation giving insight from the seaweeds. And may I invite next speaker, Dr. Tritiman Das. So introducing Dr. Tritiman Das, joined Pygmy Hawk Conservation Program in 2018. Before joining Pygmy Hawk program, he worked for Rainforest Research Institute, Jorhat, and also worked for Asuka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment, Bangalore. His area of interest is habitat ecology, grassland conservation, Pygmy Hawk ecology, and interdisciplinary approach to biodiversity conservation. So, and over to Tritiman.
Yeah, thank you, Vibhuti. Hope I am audible, no?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So that's my topic, and I will have some glimpses of these sub-Himalayan grasslands. So as you know, the Tarai-Duar Savanna grassland ecoregion, which is commonly known as the Tarai-Duar Savanna or grasslands, is a kind of, in a broader perspective, the etymology which Duars and Tarai, these are like sociological constructive. But apart from what we generally speaking, we call them as a sub-Himalayan grassland. So this is the sub-Himalayan grassland distribution. It's a kind of a linear ecosystem having like maximum 2000 kilometer land. We have a mean sea level of less than 300 meter, and the maximum wide of that ecosystem is around 80 kilometer. So the most interesting facts about this ecosystem is its soil type. So we have a Bhavar soil, and broadly speaking, it's a Bhavar soil and Tarai soil. Bhavar soil, as you know, it's a lot of boulder, sand, and silts, and whereas Tarai is a fine alluvium. So the social history and governance of this ecosystem I started from post-independence. So we have a lot of post-partition migration happened to these ecosystems, broadly coming from Pakistan, and then again in the eastern side we have a lot of internal migration happened to these areas. So for example, in the western Tarai, we have like 4,046 square kilometer area actually reclaimed through these processes. Like we have a lot of endemic malaria in this area. Historically speaking, these are areas are endemic for malaria. So with the coming up the DDT and create more food creation initiative of Government of India, actually lead more area grasslands actually reclimatize for agriculture purposes, both in India and Nepal. So at the present day, this is the small, very fragmented pockets of the grassland in sub-Himalayan region. So we did some sample analysis, and we found that in 1918, where we have 1,417 square kilometer grassland actually reduced to in 2019 to 922 square kilometer of grassland. So again, this ecosystem is very unique. If you see the climatic determinants of the vegetation, which basically govern the grasslands all across different biomes. So in the climatic determinants, if we take the only temperature and rainfall, that these grasslands should basically either tropical moist deciduous or semi-evergreen forest. But actually in ground, we see a complex variation of grassland and woodland mosaic. So these grasslands, all most productive grassland and very tall. We have a different varieties like tall swampy, dry grassland, grassland woodland mosaics. And these grasslands are a successional grassland. Its herbivore density is impressive. It's actually equal to East African savanna, and we have a more than 60 mammals all across these ecosystems. Again, cultural community, again, with the diversity, we have a very fantastic culture and community diversity in this area. So actually, what governed this ecosystem? What is the ecology? So the biggest driver of this is the shifting of river channel, the river action. The river continually remodels this landscape, and the location, depending upon the water sources, we have different grassland community organization appears and reappears. Then the second issue is the fire. So fire is historically very old in these ecosystems, like more than 5,000 years of history of the fire. So these, we have kind of a synergistic effect of fire and hydrology, and it creates and it maintains this grassland. Then again, the selective browsing by the herbivores, like how the elephants, the mega herbivores actually browse and graze these grassland, natural grasslands. They actually also work as kind of a driver to govern this ecosystem. So all over, the final synthesis is what we see in the grasslands is basically governed by river action, different adaptive factors, fire and site history, and that actually controls this plant community organization. The conservation challenges, the biggest one is again, regional level. We have a lot of peoples reside here. As you see, the population density of this particular region is very high. This is the human footprint map for this region. And you can see from 1993 to 2009, we have a massive human footprint in these ecosystems. Again, water demanding crash crop like sugarcane is coming up promptly, and again, fragmentation of landscape in both India and Nepal, and creating more roads, irrigation, rapid urbanization, actually fragmented more, and only the remaining pockets are in the protected areas. So in protected areas also, we have to think about the dam issue and all these things. So we have multiple dams actually coming up. We have insufficient ecological impact assessment in downstream, how these actually impact on these grasslands. We have again transboundary water issue, both from India, Bhutan, Nepal, China. So these Himalayan regions overall, we have a lot of transboundary water issues, which is actually create a hindrance. Then I don't speak about a lot about climate change impacts. Yes, and definitely climate change has a major role. So in landscape level, we actually studied a little bit on some protected areas and how it actually changes. And we see that last 30 years, overall natural grasslands are tremendously decreased, and like percentage wise, it's like 24%. And it is because of all the synergistic effects of the anthropogenic and natural drivers. In local and regional issue, we talk about governance issue, mainly the cattle grazing, encroachment, anti-FP collection, park protected area, local community relationship, the political ecology of all these things. Again, on the biological issues, we have this invasive alien plant. That is a massive problem for all these grasslands. Either it's the Chromolina, Lantana, Mimosa, Mycenia, and all these things. So the restoration issue, in talking about very shortly, the major is again, Sir Madhu sir actually touched that thing, that lack of awareness about the importance of grassland, either against IAPS and also like all our nowadays nature-based solution is more advocated to tackle habitat degradation, and those are more on tree-centric. So we basically don't look at the role of biodiversity and carbon sequestration in these grasslands. Forest-centric, again, actually embedded in the decision-making system, actually create problems for this dynamic landscape, to maintain this dynamic landscape and ecosystem. So, and then for understanding, because it's so dynamic and there are a lot of drivers which actually govern this ecosystem, that actually need a very intricate understanding of these things. So the stakeholders need and knowledge is very important. So in a conclusion, what I put here, that we need to understand the conservation issues in a different scale, either from local, landscape, regional, and we have to mainstream these findings to actionable intervention and long-term monitoring. Long-term monitoring is very critical for these grasslands. And then we also look about the integrated needs of and livelihood of community, because it's a very densely populated area and a lot of people sexually depend on these areas, also in the PAs also. So the well-being of people and natural ecosystems are very much closely linked, and we must think about it. Yeah, thank you, Vibhuda.
Thank you, Ritiman, giving an overview on the sub-Himalayan grassland, and thank you finishing the presentation on time. May I request Anushree? Are you ready, Anushree? Yes, I am introducing Anushree here, an ecologist by training, has been working on natural resource management and climate change for last 14 years. She has worked with grassroots organizations, national NGOs, as well as INGOs, such as Nature Conservancy, IUCN, UN. She presently working with the Green Climate Fund Division of Portfolio Management. While at IUCN, she co-authored the Government of India's first progress report on bond challenges, a first from any countries in the world. She has worked on varied landscape and ecosystem across South Asia. She was awarded with the prestigious Chevening Research, Science and Innovation Leadership Fellowship by Government of UK in 2019. So over to Anushree.
Thank you so much. I hope my screen is visible in full screen mode.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity. I'll be talking about the role of grasslands in meeting international commitments. So just very quickly, whenever we talk about restoration, generally the mind goes to forest restoration. So it is important, this particular grassland dialogue is especially important and very timely, because it is important for us to step outside of forest, to talk about grasslands, rangelands and savannas. And I think my distinguished panel members have given a very nice overview of a lot of variety of grasslands and rangelands across the South Asian landscape. So there is excellent background for me to just dive into. And just to very quickly talk about it, grasslands are often mistakenly classified as wastelands and degraded forests. This is essentially a hangover of our colonial policies and practices. And even now, even in countries such as India, we talk about a wasteland map of the country, where often erroneously we are actually talking about grasslands or rangelands, which is quite sad considering that these are some of the most ancient, diverse, and also very culturally important landscapes. And of course, you've been told by various speakers about the various important ecosystem functions and ecosystem services that grasslands provide. Apart from various things like food security, water regulation, it is also important to note that grasslands also provide the very important role of carbon sequestration, which has varied implications when we talk about climate change mitigation adaptation measures. They are also home to some of the world's most iconic species, and I think Vibhuti and other colleagues have talked about that to some extent. And today being the World Migratory Day, it's also important to remember that some of these landscapes often provide critical stopover and winter habitats for migratory bird species along important flyway migration routes across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. So if we talk about grasslands as multifaceted landscapes, it is important to remember, and I think as many of you might be aware, the definition of grasslands varies depending on organizations, but it's largely depending on the different definitions. It is understood that about 20 to 40% of all our planet's land is a grass-dominated ecosystem. Therefore, it is surprising, it is disappointing that of this large area that is under grasslands ecosystems, less than 10% of them are actually protected or given any kind of protection status. Now, when we talked about carbon sequestration role of grasslands, there is now research coming up that's actually finding that grasslands and rangelands often store carbon more effectively than forests because they have larger below ground biomass, they are also more reliable carbon sinks because they are more resilient when it comes to facing future climatic changes such as drought. Therefore, restoration of grasslands should actually both serve as a measure for climate change mitigation. They should help to restore key ecosystem services. And like we talked about, the cultural roles, the important livelihood roles, they would be very important for the lives and the livelihoods of pastoral communities and agro-pastoral communities who largely depend on grasslands, including very much in South Asian region. However, grasslands are often a common victim. They fall prey to afforestation drives. They are a common prey to land use land conversion. And they are often overlooked as target habitats for restoration. This is just a quick image that I kind of like to draw on. It's taken from Temperton et al. It is a paper that talks about the difference between reclamation, rehabilitation, and ecological restoration. And over here, I would just like to take a minute to remember that when we say ecological restoration, we are talking about ecosystem functions, structures, various other focus on biodiversity conservation, on climate change, and it is important. It's talking about a way forward with a historical reference system. Now, it is important to remember that often it's not possible to go back, that we don't often have that historical reference system. So we might be talking about moving and improving the ecosystem function and structure. But when we talk about reclamation, we are actually moving away. It is a replacement. And this is something that often happens to grasslands. Instead of restoration, they are often reclaimed for various purposes, like agriculture, by tree plantations, by afforestation, and so on. With just focus on that, I would just like to dive into the global realities of grassland restoration. Now, over here, it is important to just focus on the fact that compared to forests and even wetlands, there are much fewer publications and restoration projects in grasslands, globally as well as in the South Asia region. Globally, I mean, there is research that's compared and found that compared to forests, there are even less than half of that many publications that focus on grassland and grassland restorations. And if we talk about the Paris Agreement of 2015, which was a very iconic landmark agreement, and whenever we talk about UNFCCC and climate change, we often refer to Paris Agreement. It is very interesting to note that of the signatories who made commitments under the Paris Agreement, 42% of them had some kind of tied their national determined contributions, the NDCs, or forest restoration targets. In comparison, grasslands only figured in only 8% of the NDCs, which gives you a very stark reality, check on where we are with grassland and grassland restoration. And as per the Government of India data that was presented at the last COP14 in 2019 of the UNCCD, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, India reportedly lost 31%. It is a whopping 5.65 million hectares of grassland area between just 2005 and 2015. And these are important reality checks to keep in mind, because right now we are actually having the UNCCD COP15 as we speak, and it is going to go on till the 20th of this month. And these are important reality checks to keep in mind as we talk about international commitments, international conventions, and where grassland can and should feature in them. So when we talk about even global projects or regional projects which have a grassland focus, you may know of the Global Environment Facility, which is a multi-trust facility that was set up that addresses both land degradation, biodiversity conservation, climate change, chemicals, and so on. Of the very large GEF portfolio, if you look at just the titles and the focus, there are only 25 projects with rangeland focus, only 9 with grassland project focus, and only 5 in savannas. So in South Asia, there's only Nepal and Pakistan which have 1 project each on a grassland and a rangeland focus. Very surprising, very saddening results. Another large multi-trust fund, if we look at it, is the Green Climate Fund, which where I'm working with the Division of Portfolio Management. Now, in the GCF portfolio, which is recently comparatively new in comparison to GEF, there are several grasslands and rangeland projects, mostly from Africa, but so far there are none from South Asia. Even though we have projects with a mangrove focus, it is extremely disappointing that we've not had any submissions from the South Asian countries on grasslands, especially considering that the Green Climate Fund's focus is completely on climate change. And we've just talked about how important grasslands are in climate change mitigation. Even when we talk about Bond Challenge, which is a global voluntary pledge to bring 350 million hectares of degraded and deforested land into restoration by the year 2030, largely the focus under Bond Challenge has also been on forests, even though it comes under forest and landscape restoration, and grasslands should have featured there very prominently. With all the pledges, there have been more than 70 pledges from 60 countries that have come under Bond Challenge so far. Most of them, if you look at it and if you track it, the pledges are on afforestation and on tree planting activities. So again, grassland focus seems very missing there. Now, all is not lost. There is renewed international focus on grasslands, and it is important to remember that we've recently started the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. This goes on from 2021 to 2030. And it has a very strong rangeland focus. It calls for urgent need for restoration of grasslands, shrublands, and savannas, concurrent with good management practices. On 15th March of this year, the United Nations General Assembly, in fact, declared the year 2026 as the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists. So there is going to be renewed focus, renewed energy in rangeland and grassland restoration going forward. And it is up to us as to how we can ride this wave and how we can push this agenda forward. Even in IUCN's World Conservation Congress of 2021, a new resolution was passed which focused on protecting and restoring endangered grassland and savanna ecosystems. And we even have a joint IPBES-IPCC report that came out in 2021, which said that restoring carbon and species-rich ecosystems is one of the cheapest and quickest nature-based measures to implement to tackle climate change, and grasslands perfectly fits in to this description. So if we talk about a quick moment to talk about India and grasslands, and if there is a glimmer of hope in what I'm sure many of you might think is a bleak landscape. In 2018, IUCN and Government of India brought out the first progress report on Bond Challenge pledge. Interestingly, it had a case study on grasslands. Bunny grasslands, which Dr. Pankaj had talked about, was featured there as a best practice case study that others could learn from. This is very illuminating. This is very encouraging for grassland restoration. And again, as Dr. Vibhuti talked about it, grassland restoration, though not prominently featuring in a lot of working plans of the state forest departments, have slowly started trickling into a few state forest departments. In Kerala, there have been a lot of good practices of forest departments who've done these pilots along with communities on grassland restoration. And now going forward, they are actually developing new working plans where grassland restoration would be given enough focus. There are, of course, many research and pilot conservation and restoration projects happening across the country, and you've heard of several of them. So what is required in terms of going forward? Of course, there are these smaller pilots. There are these various state cases that are coming forward that many colleagues have shared. But there needs to be a larger national level commitment. There needs to be a policy focus. And when we talk about land degradation neutrality, the LDN targets, which are going to be set, and they tie in with the UNCCD. Now, all countries are setting their LDN targets, reports are being published, we'll be tracking that. If we tie in grassland restoration as specific targets against these LDN targets, that would really put the focus on grasslands in a way that would ensure that we continue to focus on it going forward. There is a lot of information that is happening. There is a lot of research that is happening. So we need to have knowledge compilation. There needs to be knowledge consolidation, and we need to ensure knowledge transfer. And I think that's something that IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management especially can take the lead on and can actually show the way for a lot of work going forward. And of course, like colleagues said, we are just scratching the tip of the iceberg in this case. So there is need for more research, and there's also more need for post-restoration management and monitoring. So we continue to look at long-term studies that would actually bring in more knowledge and would contribute back to the science policy interface and ensure that policymakers and researchers are not really working in silos, but talking to each other going forward. And looking at it at scale, there is an opportunity. There is a scope that we can turn this lacuna that exists of grassland restoration in the region, even globally, into opportunities going forward. There is clearly an international commitment to rangeland restoration that is happening. At the UNCCD COP that is happening now, there's actually a lot of push to include these grassland restorations under the LDN targets of the UNCCD. So we need to continue to engage, continue to advocate with policymakers, and ensure that grasslands are important, their importance is understood, and they are then included in the country's larger LDN and other national international commitment targets. And of course, there is importance for the global and regional restoration agendas to be harmonized with the site-specific goals. Often we have these regional commitments and we have these site-specific goals, and they do not often speak to each other. There is understanding of there is need to talk to various stakeholders involved across various levels for us to actually design these projects and programs that can synthesize the current knowledge and research and guide grassland restoration at scale across South Asia, across all our countries. And of course, you may have heard of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restorations, restoration implementers, where organizations and research institutes and NGOs who are working on restoration actually add to the knowledge base there. I've looked at it and I've realized that there is a lot of restoration implementers who've across various geographies, across various parts of the globe, but not so much from South Asia, and very few on grasslands in particular. Whereas we do have restoration implementers that are presenting on seagrasses from other parts of the world, but not from South Asia. So maybe this is just a suggestion that all of us who are working on grasslands, on rangelands, on seagrasses, could start looking at this page and at least start populating our work and submitting it as restoration implementers, so that there is this global knowledge pool that we contribute to. And of course, we ensure that people know about the great work that is happening here. And we continue to push for grasslands to be included, to be given that international lens going forward. So thank you so much. I will quickly wrap up here.
Thank you, Anushree, for giving us insight from the international perspective, from the COP to Bonn to to UN Decade, and it is very important for all of us to know this initiative, and hopefully we can take up some of the issues jointly. Now we have some time for question and answer, although we are almost 25 minutes late. Hopefully we can take one or two questions. Some people have raised their hand also. I had one question particularly asking for conflict, bit conflict. Yes, there are because you see in Indian context, India is also largest number of livestock, and there are conflict among the rangelands, among the forestry and farmland. Everyone wants their right, and everyone, like as I mentioned earlier, because it's although it's very important and no doubt about it, it's a very diverse, all the grassland, right from the sub-Himalayan to sea to everywhere. But as we are lacking policies, there are conflict. So everyone and we are my biggest threat is that we are losing time and we are losing the grassland as a whole. So so if is there any question, maybe our panelists can take. I think there is a question to Tritiman. Hello, Tritiman. You have a question. Are you going to address that?
Which one will be that?
Nature-based solution.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's maybe I put it wrongly, but what I see that all this nature-based solution or what actually advocate to tackle degradation and climate change are apparently more tree-centric or woody species, like creating more afforestation. So when we talk about more on afforestation, or they always promote woody species. So here I put that when we talk about restoration in grassland, we always think about the grasses as the Poaceae family, whether these grasses as a community can make a solution for that kind of intervention. Yeah, hope I addressed that question. Yeah.
Yes, I think. Then to whom this address? Does ROM methodology talk about grassland restoration? I am not aware of.
I can take that.
Yes.
I can take this one. Yeah, because it actually has to do with the bond challenge as well. So the ROM methodology is basically a restoration opportunity assessment methodology that IUCN had developed with partners. And as you might be aware, the Rome handbook talks about landscape restoration at large, but it doesn't really speak specific to grassland restoration, whereas it talks about mangroves and other ecosystem types. So this was brought to the attention of IUCN HQ colleagues, especially when we were working on the Bond Challenge India Progress Report. And which is why we made that specific point of including that grassland restoration case study from Bunny, so that going forward, this could be included. So just to answer your question, it doesn't talk about grassland restoration per se, even though under the landscape restoration umbrella, it would be coming in.
And there is one question from Santosh. I think Dr. Salni can answer that. Santosh is a new, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Santosh. Your question is about, because you are a new IUCN CEM member and you want to contribute to the ecosystem conservation and restoration work. I must tell you that IUCN CEM is more of a think tank where we are a lot of volunteer scientists bringing new knowledge, understanding the risk and contributing how we can conserve them. So we directly don't get involved with restoration, but yes, if you are working with the agency or organization that is working on restoration and conservation, we can share our insights, we can share our approaches, tools and methods that we are doing for helping you out with restoration. I hope this answers your query. Other than that, I think separately we can have a session. We already have sessions on IUCN CEM and what members are supposed to do and what are their contributions and how we take the contribution. So in that way, mostly these contributions are into technical documents and developing new scientific knowledge, then directly going, because we don't have those direct funds to implement those projects. So we restrict ourselves with scientific and technical information and developing new contribution to conservation, protection, and restoration. Thank you.
So I think Dr. Salini can also give the concluding remark.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bibhuti. I think the purpose of this webinar was to understand more about the grassland ecosystem in South Asia. And after long planning, I think I really see that purpose served to this, and we could learn about different grassland ecosystems across the region with a special focus on Nepal and India at large. We do have missed Shola forest and Shola grasslands in south, but I am sure that in forthcoming discussions we'll take up this issue. Because we don't have much time, I first of all would like to very briefly summarize what has been discussed, right from Dr. Madhav Karki, who was very kind to be taking part in this opening speaker of this discussion, who stressed on IBES framework that can be used as a baseline document to help us understand more about grassland ecosystem, their risk in South Asia, and how they can be restored. He also talked about and stressed on rangeland and grassland policies that have been developed in Nepal, but so far other South Asian countries are lagging behind. So I think this can be an area that we can further discuss and talk about in our discussion. Dr. Bibhuti has been really a force behind these entire webinar for last almost a month, and his insight on dry and wet grasslands across South Asia, and then how annual and biannual burning is used as a management approach in certain parts of the region has been a very important insight that I personally think I wasn't so aware about. He also highlighted about the values of grassland ecosystems, the different ecosystem services that are harnessed from the grassland ecosystem that are mostly ignored of their value for different benefits. He also talked about livelihood benefits to communities, and this has been also stressed by other speakers. And then he also talked about the threats with a focus on plantation, that is being a key drive during the plantation season in monsoon season. So this is one key point that we all need to remember when we plan our plantation exercise this monsoon. And he also talked about grassland and ignorance towards the ecological function of grassland and considering that not so usable and productive like forest. And he talked about promotion of grass species plantation instead of tree plantation in grassland areas. And I think that's a very important step and suggestion from his talk. Next presentation was by Dr. I.D. Bhatt, and he very rightly highlighted about high altitude grasslands, the alpine and subalpine grasslands, with a few important case studies that are very prominent and common in Nepal, India, and Bhutan also. The trade of caterpillar fungus that has not only damaged this ecosystem in the region, but is also leading to destruction of timberline vegetation in the region. He also talked about invasive species in high altitude wetline grassland areas, especially one of the case studies of Polygonum in Valley of Flowers in Uttarakhand. He also talked about overgrazing pressure, unsustainable tourism, unsustainable exploitation of wild medicinal plants. So these are some of the key issues that he highlighted in his presentation. And then was the presentation by Dr. Pankaj Joshi for dryland ecosystem, and he very nicely elaborated on the degradation of Banni grassland in Gujarat. That was one of the biggest Asiatic grasslands and was also one of the habitats of cheetahs, and because of its degradation, how it led to extinction of cheetah also from India. So that was an important study. And he also talked about the invasive species that are leading to degradation and has resulted in massive destruction of this key grassland area. He talked about participatory mapping exercises to understand more about the risk, and then REMBL initiatives for restoration and participatory approaches for restoration of and conservation of these grassland ecosystems in dryland areas of India. Dr. Harini Santanam was invited to speak on seagrass ecosystem because we talk about grasses, but if we do ignore the important grasslands in oceans, I think this is one of the missing areas. So we tried to have a small exposure towards that. And she very nicely covered the negative feedback loop and seagrass washing disease and seagrass climate regulators. Resilience perspective was the key of her talk. And she also talks about synthesis of transformational spaces to conserve seagrass spaces in South Asia region. Jyotiman Das was next speaker of this webinar, and he talked about conservation of sub-Himalayan grassland restoration with a focus on how long-term monitoring can help restoration of these Terai Duar savanna grasslands in the region, and especially by ensuring that people and human well-being context is very much addressed and livelihood is in the center of this entire process of restoration. So I think that's again a very important context that has also been stressed by some of our participants in the discussion. Thank you, Dr. Anushri Bhattacharjee, for bringing us more details on international commitments and discussions about grassland ecosystem, because a lot of them, about this information was lacking, and you truly filled that big space by bringing that information, and especially highlights from Jeff portfolio and then IUCN resolution that has been recently accepted in WCC 2021. I think that one step is going to take this discussion forward and understanding how we can actually, all these researchers can join each other and come up with a one dialogue on conserving restoration and understanding the ecosystem health of grasslands in the region. And thank you for also highlighting the LDN challenges and where India has been progressing and where are the gap areas and how best we can fill those gaps. So this was the summary of the discussion that happened today. Before I ask Dr. Sonali to finally conclude this session, I would thank her and Dr. Vibhuti Larkar for being the force behind this webinar. Without them, I think this couldn't have shaped up the way it is. I also thank Dr. Deepu for running the technical and handling the technical issues throughout this, and others who have directly and indirectly contributed, and especially our chair, Dr. Angela, who has been a very great motivation behind this, and Dr. Madhav Karki as well. Thank you once again, and over to you, Dr. Sonali and Dr. Vibhuti.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Shalini, and thank you so much for always motivating us, inspiring us. It's a very happening, commission and community that you have created. I think you've said, you've summarized very well. I'll just add on, and for the next steps, I thought I've just put that in the chat box as well, is that some of us, and especially you, me, Dr. Vibhuti, and many of us here, we are thinking of actually doing an in-person physical workshop. We are happy to host it in Assam because many of us are there, and we are happy to provide some co-funding support to do this. And we want to do something on grasslands. Our focus would be Terai grasslands, but we are happy to take some more and primarily look at some of the aspects and probably link it to the IUCN Red List of ecosystems and see if we could do a comprehensive assessment. So we might target September, October, or sometime during that time. And we look forward to your ideas. How do we do this? This has been a great session. Maybe this itself, Dr. Shalini, can be put into a nice review paper and we'll work towards it. So thank you. And that's great. Over to you, Vibhuti. Yeah.
First of all, thank you for your support so that we can organize this dialogue as a follow-up of our regional meeting, and hope we will continue our dialogue, particularly on the grassland issues, because if we don't do, we'll lose more grassland in future. As a collectively, we have to do in joint future, in hands in hand, and everyone, I also request everyone, we should get connected so that we can learn from each other, and we can also develop a good publication in future. Thank you.